Have a seat and then we'll get started. Morning, Bruce.
Morning, Bruce.
Hey, Bruce. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the December 1st meeting of the Grand Traverse County Public Safety Committee. First order of business will be the approval of the minutes from the November meeting.
So moved. Support.
Motion by Stepka, supported by Fleece. Further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries. This is the first opportunity this morning for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move forward with the agenda of the Grand Traverse Sheriff's Office. I would like to note that I spoke to Finance Director Mr. Bott this morning, and he had a commitment at 7:30, so he may be a little late. Should we get to that portion of the agenda, we will move forward with the medical program, and then we'll come back and do the vehicles when Dean arrives, if that would be all right with everyone.
Nate, County Sheriff's Department. First item that I have on the agenda is the snowmobile enforcement grant for 2009-2010. We submitted this back in July to the Department of Natural Resources, requesting an amount of just under $19,000. We were awarded $5,500 through that grant. They base that on a myriad of factors, one of which is inclusive of the amounts previously spent. And as you well know, we have not spent any money on snowmobile enforcement since 2004 due to reductions in our budget. So this is the amount they've given us. We are in the process of considering this amount and what we can do in terms of enforcement for this type of funding, and what other funding may be required to be needed for that type of enforcement. This is an 85-15 match, 85%, 15% match. So we're requesting that the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners accept this grant funding.
Nate, can this funding be used for anything other than snowmobile law enforcement?
No, I mean not.
Nate, does this mean we have did we anticipate $19,000 and some odd dollars as revenue?
Yes, we did.
So are you saying that you're going to reduce the size of the program down or transfer money from someplace else in the 2010 budget, or are you going to be looking to come back to the board and ask the board for more money to support the program?
They're considering the program right now in terms of what we can do for $5,500. We did anticipate $19,000 in revenue for the 2010 budget. That is not there. I don't believe that the 2010 budget has any, at this point, any anticipated areas that we can move that money from. So we're considering that, including coming back to the board, potentially asking for additional dollars. We have not yet reviewed that to that extent, though.
If we accept the grant and then we determine that we can't run a program for the $5,500 plus our match, and you come back to the county board and ask for money and they don't agree, do you have the ability to give the money back? I mean, are we obligated in some way at that point in time to run a program?
No, this is a reimbursement grant.
Okay.
But the sheriff and I will be discussing this with staff about what type of program we can run. I believe it'll be a minimal program for $5,500, unfortunately. So we are going to have to consider this.
I guess the comments that I would make would be, right now, when we're looking at our funding opportunities and we're looking at cutbacks to existing programs that serve this community well, and possibly having to eliminate programs altogether, I'm concerned about starting a program which, for all common purposes is a new program that we projected would be a $20,000 annual expenditure, and we have $5,500 to fund it. And that concerns me. I believe snowmobile enforcement tends to be pretty reactionary anyway, and that, by the time we take calls that someone out to Ranch Rudolph is operating recklessly and we can possibly respond to the guy's already 60 miles away when his snowmobile runs 100 mile an hour.
Well, I think the purpose of this program, though, is a very proactive approach to snowmobile enforcement. To actually have the sleds on the trails, stopping people for the myriad of violations that are out there, safety inspections, just the contacts. I think those type of interactions with the public are important. I know it makes an impact on me if I see a DNR sled out on the trails. It reminds me that they're out there. It reminds me that there are safety precautions that need to be taken, and in fact there are laws regarding trails. So I think if you add that to the equation, Commissioner, I think that does make it worthwhile. It is an 85-15% split, meaning the county's going to pay minimally for a very good, worthy program. And it is a small program. If it's $20,000, it's a $20,000 program. It's not significantly impacting financially, but it could have an impact on the way people recreate and keep those sleds down from 100 miles an hour.
So you say you haven't done anything since 2004, essentially?
Essentially.
Do we have a fleet of sleds?
Yes, we do.
Oh, you do?
We have 2 sleds that are fully capable of being used right now. Trailers, gear, radios, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Those have been sitting since 2004.
We've not had a program for the last 4 years, or 5 years since 2004.
That's correct.
I think with the economic times and the state giving us 5,500, I have to agree with Sonny. I think we ought to wait another year or so.
Other comments?
Well, I just,
Do you have a recommendation?
my comment was going to be simply that there is mention in here that we may see increases in future years, but I'm guessing that means those are incremental increases, cost of living increases. They're not going to be bringing us back up to where the other program used to be anytime soon, I would think, with the state situation being what it is. So, my feeling is unless they can run a program that is meaningful for the $5,500, I would not recommend that we continue to put more county money into this as it being a new program, at this point in our financial situation.
Sheriff, did you want to make a comment?
Couple comments. Number one, the way the state bases their allocations is they look at past history. We have none. We're starting from scratch, basically. They can't look back at last year's enforcement work that we did with number of hours patrol and citations and tickets and how much it cost for us to operate that snowmobile program. So we have no history, nothing to base it on. I have talked with the lady who administers the program in Lansing and said, is there any more money available? And she said, well, at this point, we've allocated it almost to all to the penny. And this revenue comes from snowmobile registrations, trail permits. It's dedicated money. It really is a little different than the state budget, okay? So it's not tied to the state budget. Most all the money the DNR gets for all their programs is dedicated money. So we're starting basically from scratch, and this is the amount they allocated. She has indicated to me when I talked to her, as soon as I got the letter from them, that she believes there's one county that's not going to accept their grant. So I've already said, hey, we'd like that money up here. She can't make any promises. The other thing I indicated to her was that, we would like this program, and when you're dealing with peanuts, it's hard to grow the program because they look at last year's funding and base the following year's allocation on what you did the year before. So their theory is that, or the way they would figure this, is that this will grow minutely over a very long period of time. I think that's what Mr. Aloy indicated. So we've already asked for more money. I think the total budget was about $19,000. 15% of that would be the county's match, and the 85% is from the DNR. So looking at this, with this grant amount of $5,500, I think the county's share would be
$825.
$825. And that's not a huge amount of money. We haven't looked at our 2010 budget. This total amount, I think, has been budgeted in the county's 2010 year budget. But again, I think that was based on the fact that we would hope for we would hope for a larger amount. So basically, if we don't do anything this year, I'm guessing that we'll get the same response next year, and that we need to at least start someplace. This would be obviously a minimal program, and we haven't looked at how many hours we'd be able to operate the program. Typically, this is a weekend program. And Commissioner Wheelock, you're correct. Somebody calls in about a snowmobile trespassing, there's no way we're going to find that person. Just like if there's a speeder through Kingsley, he's gone before the patrol car gets down there. But it's our presence on the trail. People know that we're going to be out there, and they don't know where we're going to be or when we're going to be out there, but they do know that the Sheriff's Office in Grand Traverse County has a snowmobile program. Last year, Kalkaska County got $36,000 from the DNR for their snowmobile program. They have a lot of trails. They have very active patrol over there. We were expecting about 3 times this amount from the DNR, about $15,000. Hypothetically, if the county this year, if the DNR provides $5,500, hypothetically, if the county were to put in $10,000, the DNR, will look at that total amount spent next year in planning for the 2010-11 year program. They recognize that that program was $15,000 the year before, okay? And part of their decision-making is based on what was spent the year prior. I'm not asking for $10,000, just using
That's
that
good.
as an example. So we would like the opportunity to at least continue to look at where we might find some money in our budget. The state has already indicated there may be more money available.
You know, I'm looking, even if we add 15% to this, we've got about a $6,300 budget. You know, I can't imagine what we can functionally do with $6,300.
Well, the people who are actually doing the work are seasonal officers. They aren't full-time officers. And so at the seasonal rate, and most of the money would be salaries, that would be a fairly significant amount of time on the trails. Because I'm just going to use the figure about $12 per hour, including minimal benefits that they get for 2 people. That's $24 an hour. That's $240 per shift, and we can spread that out over the winter. Now, depending on how much snow we get, that's also a factor. If this doesn't start until January, if there's not enough snow, then we're only looking at 2.5 months worth of actual time on the trails. It's not like it's going to start tomorrow and run through the end of March. So that's still up in the air when it actually would start. We need the snow. And depending on how much snow we get, depends on how much activity the patrols would have.
This is a 2009-10 grant. It's like in place from October.
Yes.
Okay.
October 1 through May 1.
Eric?
I would make a motion that we allow the Sheriff's Department to accept the grant of $5,500, and that we do the 15%, which would be $825, and the county's contribution this year is not to exceed the $825.
I would support that.
We have a motion made and seconded. Further discussion?
Well, it seems to me we have to be aware too that they got an older fleet of snowmobiles and this program we're starting now will continue to escalate in cost year by year. I mean, they're gonna have to replace those snowmobiles at $10,000 at minimum a snowmobile and so on.
The snowmobiles, they can be purchased with state funds.
Oh.
That is an allowable expense if they approve those expenditures. So our snowmobiles are 10 years old. They were gone through last spring, and they're in good shape. They don't have many miles on them, considering their age. So we would expect, hopefully, that they would get us through this year. We can apply next year on the snowmobile grant, not only for funding for officers and associated equipment and the things needed to run the program, like fuel and maintenance costs, but we can also apply for the purchase of snowmobiles.
You know, the snowmobile industry has been a decreasing deal. You know, you take M37 South here, in front of my store, it used to be, it was nonstop snowmobiles in the wintertime. Of course, we haven't had the snow in the last 6-7 years. Even last year, I think I remember 3 snowmobiles. So I think the priority on snowmobile enforcement, at least in this area, you know, I don't see where we should invest a whole lot in it. And if we've gotten by the last 5 years without it, but I understand what you're saying, so that's why I made the motion.
But the one thing about it, there doesn't take an awful lot of snowmobiles to still have a fair amount of fatalities. It's a comparatively dangerous sport, and whatever we can do to keep a lid on it is worth it.
May I
Go ahead.
May I clarify the motion then? It says not to exceed $825 as a county match. So if the Sheriff's Department finds budget funds in 2010 that we can use for this, that is something that this board is not going to support. That's my understanding of what your motion was.
No, if the intent of my motion would be we're not going to appropriate any additional funds. If the Sheriff's Department found some additional funds within their budget and we're able and willing to have Mr. Bott move over the line item, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Like the sheriff wants to give up, you know, 10 grand out of his salary or something, that'd be fine.
Thanks.
Smile, Sheriff.
I guess, you know, one of the comments I would make is we also have to remember that we can do some snowmobile enforcement at road crossings and things with patrol cars that we currently have out there. You know, I know it's more difficult, but it can be done. You know, I will support this motion this morning, but when it comes back to the Board of Commissioners meeting at the end of the month, I'd like to see some sort of an idea of what your program's going to look like for $6,000, how many hours we're going to talk about, and therefore, you know, based on, so we can really evaluate whether or not it's a reasonable program. I have a lot of concerns about starting new programs at a time we're having discussions about cutting back current existing programs that have served this community very well, and, you know, possibly even having to eliminate some of those programs. And some of those programs are in your department also. So, you know, those are concerns. So, is there any other discussion? All right, so if we clarify the motion is to accept the $5,500 grant from the DNR, appropriate the money as identified by the Sheriff's Department to the 15% match or additional funds that they find within their current budget.
No, we'll supply the 825.
We will supply the 825, and if they
nothing
want any
additional.
additional money, they have to find it within their budget.
Exactly.
Okay? Any further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Thank you. Second item on the agenda is a surplus vehicle. This is the 2000 Chevy Impala that was damaged in a not-at-fault accident earlier this year. The vehicle estimates were between $3,000 and $6,000 for repair. The vehicle is not worth that. We would like to declare it surplus and auction.
Larry?
I would move that we declare the 2000 Chevrolet Impala with 120,237 miles and it's damaged, surplus.
Support.
Motion made and seconded. I'm not sure why you gave me the kilometer readings on this.
This was a vehicle ordered directly from Canada. This was Sheriff Barr's vehicle. For whatever reason, got it from Canada, so it has kilometers.
I see. Okay,
An effort to be humorous, Commissioner Wheelock.
all right. So we have a motion made and seconded to declare this vehicle surplus. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries.
The third item on the agenda is a request back that we made actually through the November Public Safety Committee meeting, and in an effort to identify remaining funds in 2010, recognizing that there is going to be some difficulties in 2010 to purchase vehicles, we are trying to identify funds remaining in 2009 to use 4 vehicles. This board allowed us to purchase 2 vehicles out of the remaining funds out of 2009. That is in process, and this board also requested that we come back to you with additional, more accurate figures in the December Public Safety meeting to identify for the potential use of vehicle purchases in 2009. Mr. Bott has done that. He and I had discussed this list. This list is, we are in agreement with these numbers. There's $96,000 identified there for you. It is my thought that we could probably only use 40 of that. Just to be sure that we have remaining funds at the end of 2009. Right now, we have 2 vehicles that are in the Detective Bureau. They both are Chrysler Sebrings, and one Chrysler Sebring, and a Pontiac that are having significant difficulties. The Sebring has engine trouble and is leaking oil, and we don't think we can get that vehicle through 2010. We don't think we can get the Pontiac through 2010. We would like to replace those vehicles in 2009, and it may be easier to do that with the plain vehicles rather than the patrol vehicles, because the patrol vehicles take so long to get to us. These vehicles, if we followed the same logic that this board applied in November, and not to have a not-to-exceed limit, we did these bids back in November. I think the bids would still be good, but the bids it would take us too long to order those cars through Bill Marsh or through Signature Auto. If we had a not-to-exceed limit, we may be able to go to a dealership and purchase vehicles off the lot by December 31st. That's an effort to get it done and expended in 2009. I understand there are ways that we could maybe do it differently, but that would be my thought.
Larry?
You're talking new vehicles off the lot?
Yes. For use in the Investigative Service Division.
And the previous 38,000 that we approved is not...
Jail.
It's not included in this?
Corrections.
That's correct.
That's jail, corrections.
Dean, did you want to add something?
The budget amendments for those 2 vehicles have been made. They came to Ways and Means last month, and those were covered within the corrections budget.
Right, and those were approved at the board meeting last week.
Okay.
Nate, I guess I'm a little confused, because I know there was a number of vehicles, and I can't remember how many there were that were requested in your 2010 budget.
8.
There were some investigative vehicles, and there were also patrol vehicles. I guess my confusion is to which is the priority right now, if we were going to buy vehicles. Is it patrol vehicles, or is it the investigative vehicles?
We have replaced an engine in the Investigative Service Division in one of the vehicles, and only because of the recent vehicle, needs of maintenance, this is becoming a priority for the Investigative Services Division. And more directly, I don't believe we can order and receive patrol vehicles until well into 2010. At this point, it takes too long to get those vehicles in order.
We have to have them in our hands by the end of the year in order to bill them to the end of the year cost. So that's the difficulty there.
So what my thought was is that we would purchase the Investigative Services Division vehicles in 2009, and then this board said that we could come to it in 2010 through the capital improvements budget and ask for vehicle-specific to the needs at that time, and it is my anticipation that we're going to be coming and asking for patrol vehicles at that time exclusively. It takes a long time to get patrol vehicles, and I don't think we can get it done.
Nate, you've looked at, I mean, I'm sure they're gone, but you've looked at state purchasing, make sure there's nothing in the state purchasing of vehicles, or like I know Oakland County oftentimes does a big bid on behalf of counties and gets an allocation of vehicles, and you've checked with them to see there's no patrol vehicles available anywhere?
That is correct.
Okay.
The Macomb County bid is the bid I
Macomb.
think you're referring to, and that is the bid we use
Okay.
through Signature Auto, and it takes 4 to 6 weeks. And we cannot be promised in any way, shape, or form that those vehicles will be here before the end of 2009. And I know that's not the only, there are ways maybe that we could deal with that, but I guess I'd like to have them to be sure that we
Yeah.
are able to use 2009 funds.
I'll tell you, I was concerned about the idea that, we identified $98,000 and we might spend it all, on vehicles, even though in other years we've done that. And the reason I was concerned is simply that, when the budget is completed at the end of the year and Dean closes out all the books, he, looks at all the pluses and all the minuses, and that's what tells us whether we have a positive fund balance or a negative balance at the end of the year. And this year's could be tight. Dean and I just had a discussion of it yesterday. We have no idea what it's going to look like at the end of the year. So, to spend $98,000, I would be uncomfortable with that number. But Nate's idea, I think, of getting the 2 vehicles now, since there's a need for them, I think, you're comfortable with that, Dean, I assume?
Yes, I am. As Dennis mentioned, it's almost impossible at this point to determine where we'll actually end 2009, because I simply don't know what commitments are out there with all of the departments. I looked at the numbers at the end of November last year compared to November this year, and our revenues are, the difference between revenues and expenditures at this point in time compared to a year ago, we're plus 70,000, so the spread is greater. That's a good thing, but there are special extra payrolls in December, and it's just hard to estimate what the accounts payable are. But yes, if they're authorized to purchase 2 vehicles with, the funds we've identified here, I'm very comfortable with that.
And then Nate, what you're saying, so we agree with that. Nate, what you're saying then is, we would expect to see you in January or February with a request for patrol vehicles that we'd have to kind of figure out how we would address.
Well, it's my anticipation that we will go all back out for bids in probably February or March.
Okay.
The earlier the better for patrol vehicles, because they turn those vehicles over in July. So
Well,
start seeing-
I guess my only comment would be, it probably makes sense then to come back in January or February and have a discussion with the board, so we can discuss where we might find that money before you go through all the trouble of going out to bids.
That'd be a
my
good time too, because then we'd have '09 budget done, we'd find out where we stand, and
February we would, yeah, you're right.
Well, I guess I'm not sure which way is easier, whether, it's going to be the end of January, basically, before Dean has 2009 totaled. I'm wondering if maybe we go for bids in January, early February, so we know exactly what we're asking for when it comes time to spend money. It's kind of the chicken or the egg, which comes first, but I guess it's easier to have the current bid in hand and know exactly how much money you're asking for. I'm not a huge fan of not to exceed amounts, approving those kind of expenditures. I like to know exactly what I'm spending. I have no problem with, supporting a motion this morning of, up to $40,000 or something like that to purchase these 2 investigative bids. But, I would like to see the sheriff's office come in here very early in 2010 and ask for patrol vehicles, because I believe we've identified a need. And I think the board has a commitment that is a priority for us to spend out of our capital budget once we have 2009 totaled. So, I would accept a motion to authorize the not to exceed amount of, you choose to purchase investigative vehicles.
What does Nate feel he needs? Is 40,000 going to be adequate?
I believe so.
Based on
more than
business.
20.
Based on the bids, he's got bids
Yeah.
from everywhere from 16,000 to 21,000, basically, for those types of
That
vehicles.
gives them a little bargaining power, too.
Well, then I would
Negotiating
make
power.
that motion that we move to buy the two vehicles and not to exceed $40,000 by the end of '09.
Support. Okay, I have a motion by Hooper, supported by Stepka. Is there
Right.
further discussion?
Well, I'd just like to ask the board's indulgence to allow him to begin the process now of negotiating the price and purchase of those vehicles, because the board meeting's going to be on the 23rd, I think. And, if we wait till the 23rd, he's not going to have any time to do that.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
This is a-
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
We'll
Further
be back
discussion?
January 5th, then. Is that what I'm hearing? January 5th, public safety? January 5th, public safety is...
Oh, as regard to patrol vehicles?
Yes, that's your...
We won't have total numbers for 2009 January, so
February.
I would say probably at February Public Safety, I'd like to see bids for 2010 patrol cars.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries.
Now the fun part.
The next item, I'm going to have Captain Hall. He did a lot of work on the jail medical bids. I'd like him to be, present this to you.
Morning, Bob.
Good morning, I'm Captain Bob Hall, Jail Administrator, Grand Traverse County. What I bring to you this morning is our results of our bids that we put out for jail medical service for the next 3 years. Gave you quite an extensive package. I'll just briefly go through some of the highlights of this. We went through the history so that you understand what we have in the jail now with a local contracted physician. The county has the nurses that are county employees. All the services that we use are in Grand Traverse County, different vendors, a dentist. We use Munson for the lab work and major medical. We use various specialists in the area, if there's bone specialists or cardiac specialists, whatever. We have been approached by some managed correctional health care vendors over the last couple of years, which have now infused into the state of Michigan, and they're all over the United States, that deal just strictly with jails and prisons. So what we did is we put out an RFP that was a two-part RFP. One was for a in-house program like we currently have used for the last, well, almost all of my career. And
So since the 40s?
it's almost 30 years, thank you. The other part was Program B, which was for the managed healthcare, which in essence, we would turn over the entire medical program to a vendor. They take care of everything, hospitalization, dental, lab tests, x-rays, follow-up, specialized care, everything's turned over to them. We sent bids out to several different vendors, and we also advertised in the Record Eagle. And I listed on page 2 the vendors that we did invite who are big into the area. Only 3 responses were received. One from the current doctor who manages our medical program, and then Advanced Correctional Healthcare, ACH, and Health Professionals Limited, HPL. The next page talks about the comparisons. First thing I wanted to do was the toughest part was to compare apples to apples and get the program so that I'm actually looking at what we're doing now so I can evaluate what these other healthcare providers would give us in terms of services, and also cost is a major factor. So what I did is I went back and projected this year as well as the last 3 years of actual expenses that we spent out of the budget, our operating budget for medications, pharmaceuticals, Munson, dentist, and all other materials, the running of the jail medical clinic, clinic supplies, lab tests, specialists, outside costs, to get a true figure for what we were actually spending so I could sit down and analyze what the other vendors were proposing. And what I did was I averaged it out, and over the last 4 years, we're averaging about $147,852.75 per year for those expenses. That figure was important to be able to evaluate what the other companies are telling us it would cost us for those same services. Page 5, we have the current program listed as Dr. Wilcox is our current vendor. HPL and ACH both offered alternate programs. That's why they're listed Program 1 and 2 for each of those two vendors. The subtotal, you can see what those are across the board. Let me explain the asterisks. The single asterisk, HPL says that for all of the medications, pharmaceuticals, outside medical costs, etc., they have a $51,300 ceiling on that. Anything that exceeds that, the county pays the excess amount. For ACH, they have a variable ceiling. Everything up to $70,000 ACH will cover. Between $70,001 to $100,000, ACH will split the cost 50-50 with the county. Everything in excess of the $100,000 threshold, the county is responsible for. So the maximum amount ACH will cover, their exposure is $85,000.
Stop for a minute and just walk through and explain to them so they understand the difference between HPL1, HPL2, HCH1, HCH2. I think if they know that now, it'll help them as they go through the rest of this.
I will do that in just a couple pages.
All right.
We cover the different programs.
Bob, in regard to the asterisk note here, my question has to do with the HPL proposal has a ceiling of $51,300 on this category. I see in our 2010 budget, we budgeted $115,000. Is all of that inclusive? You know, is what we're budgeting for $110,000, they're capping at $51,000?
Yes. So there's going to be a built-in projected shortage right off the bat.
Yeah, a big one.
But that's even further exacerbated by the fact that we're actually historically spending $147,852 on these every year. So even our $115,000 that we have budgeted
I'm projecting a $100,000 shortfall here.
is a projected shortage. Now, what's interesting is these numbers are fluid. They are as unpredictable as you can imagine, because I cannot predict the medical needs of the inmate population a year from now. I just can't do that. If somebody has a heart attack and it wipes out our budget, as Dean knows. If they don't, we keep our fingers crossed and we come out pretty good in the budget year. We just don't know. The other thing I don't know is these two other health care providers have a track history of saving a lot of money for their clients. What they're going to save for Grand Traverse County, they're predicting that they won't exceed that $51,000. That's their best guess.
Because they're controlling the medications?
Controlling the medications, they have bulk purchasing power, everything's in place already. There's a lot of factors that weigh into that. Yes, Dennis?
Bob, I want to make sure I'm clear on that. Bob and I and the sheriff spent a good deal of time going over this last month. We're currently spending our average is $147,000 a year in prescriptions.
Well, that includes prescriptions, pharmaceuticals, lab tests, hospitalization. If we have to have somebody go up to the hospital for a week, it's all rolled into that.
So it's apples to apples?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all rolled into that.
Thank you.
And that's one thing I did notice, Dr. Wilcox is pretty generous with his medications, according to your analysis. Isn't that what we found? Or,
It may prove to be.
yeah.
I don't know what their doctors will
Oh,
give
okay.
out. I do know that we have tried, just in the area of medications, we've tried over the last several years to change our medication provider to get the correctional facility standard, which are now blister packs that are all prepackaged with the inmates, so it eliminates having to take the pill bottle, open it up, get the right dosage out. They all come prepackaged. So that all the officer or the nurse would have to do is just pop those pills through the blister pack and it goes into the cup and the inmate takes them. It's all pre-checked.
But that
Very
also
expensive.
allows it to be reused.
Yes. Right now, when we buy medications from a local pharmacy,
Oh, okay.
if that inmate were to leave and it doesn't require the medications anymore, there is no recovery of that medication. It has to be destroyed. There's nothing you can do with it. The pharmacy won't take it back because the pill bottle's been opened. The blister packs that are all individually sealed, they will give you 100% credit back for the ones that are not used. However, for our size operation, the expense was just phenomenal over what we're already paying for that bottle to have them blister packed. These healthcare companies have contracts with major pharmaceutical suppliers that they come blister packed cheaper than what we're able to pay for the individual prescription bottles. So there's going to be a lot of recognized savings just in medication. The next page, page 6, I looked at that $147,800 some annual cost and looked at how it compared to the caps that both companies were offering versus the $115,000 that we had in this year's 2010 budget, and predicted a shortage across the board based on if we still do business as we have been over the last 4 years. If you plug that shortage into the baseline proposed cost, we get a subtotal which is a more reflective of what this program could actually cost the county. That's the middle column. Now, there's another factor that both these companies have. Both these companies have a ceiling cap on your average daily population, which confused even the process even more. The HPL looked at our average daily population at the time that they did the proposal and gave us an average daily population calculated at 142. This morning we have 143, so they're pretty close. The other one, ACH, looked over the last 10 years and came up with an average daily population of 160, which is probably accurate over the last 10 years. HPL will charge 36 cents per inmate per day just for the number of inmates that exceed that cap at the end of a month. ACH does it, if you exceed the cap, only 12 cents per inmate per day if you exceed 160. However, the negative side of that is there's no reduction in cost if you're less than the cap. So we've worked the cap into the worst-case scenario on page 7.
For both of them, there's no reduction.
There's no reduction. For page 7, assuming the worst-case scenario, if we were at 194 inmates, which is our authorized maximum capacity for the Grand Traverse County Jail, HPL would cost us an additional $6,832.80 a year, maximum. That's the worst-case scenario as far as that cap is concerned. It's $14.89.20 for the ACH program. Adding those into the subtotals from the prior page gives us now the worst-case scenario across the board that we would be exposed to with all of these programs on the bids, as you see on page 7. Understanding that we historically have never been at 194 constantly. It could happen, but we've not been there. And also, we don't know what these companies are going to save us as far as their costs, their perceived costs, or their projected costs for our company. Every vendor that we spoke to, or every county that we spoke to on the references, indicated for both ACH and HPL that they saved them a lot of money from what they were spending prior. So we can only hope that their projections are somewhere in the ballpark. And again, note that these do not include a psychiatrist at the jail. We're currently spending about $20,000 a year for a psychiatrist to come in for 2 hours once a week. And that psychiatrist deals with the most severe mentally ill inmates in our jail, prescribes and monitors the psychotropic medications that she prescribes, and interacts with the medical department to make sure that it's not in conflict with anything that they're taking or prescribing. Page 8 looked and compared at the medical staffing. The medical director, you can see what they're looking at as far as the doctor actually on site. All of them have emergency after-hour 24-hour 24-hour on-call status, the registered nurses for each of the programs, and any LPNs, which we've never used in our jail before, but some of the bids proposed using LPNs to cover evenings or some weekends for medication distribution and other medical functions. The following pages actually describe the programs. Dr. Wilcox's program that we have right now, and I refer to it as Dr. Wilcox as he's our current medical provider. You can see what we do and what we pay for. And the next page is a map showing where Dr. Wilcox's program is currently used in the state of Michigan. And this is where Mr. Aloy asked that I explain the difference between HPL1 and HPL2 and ACH1 and ACH2. Basically, it's the number and what nurses they use. HPL's program, their program 1, HPL hires all their own nurses. They would not use our nursing staff. However, in all of the facilities that HPL has taken over, they have hired the staff that was currently employed by the department. And for the most cases, except for 1 or 2 instances, all of those people are still working for HPL. HPL2's program allows 24-hour nurse coverage. That's the only difference. They have midnight nurses. Program 1 has day shift and afternoon shift, but it's 7 days a week.
And ours currently is, how would you describe it?
I would describe it as we have Monday through Friday, basically, all 3 shifts. However, that's going to be changed here as soon as the new nurse that we just hired is trained and up and running. A couple of the nurses are going to have to remove themselves from a week shift in order to cover a weekend. We want to cover at least 1 shift on a Saturday and 1 shift on a Sunday. When they do that, that'll pull them off of the weekday shift. So we haven't worked that out yet. She's still in training. That's the difference between HPL1 and HPL2, and you can see the map on the following page as to where they are in the state of Michigan. We were just notified that HPL has purchased another company and another healthcare provider that was in 3 or 4 of the lower counties that did not respond to our bids, and I don't remember which one. So they now have 3 or 4 more that is not reflected on this map. ACH talks about their program.
Excuse me, HPL just got
Yes,
some more?
HPL just added about 4 more counties.
So the map page, I think, is very useful to look at, just so you, that's the graphic way of looking at who's where. Okay, thanks. Sorry, Bob.
Well, that's okay. I might add that on HPL, if you look, Mackinac County is serviced by HPL. Mackinac County was the first county jail in the United States here just this past year that became accredited or certified through the American Corrections Association's new core jail standards for small and medium-sized jails. And one of the things they hung their hat on to get that was HPL's management of their medical program. They were real happy with that. The only difference between ACH's 1 program and 2 program is ACH2 uses the county's nurses. They let us retain our 3 nurses, and we use them however we can use them to provide the services. And you can see where they are in the state of Michigan, just Leelanau and Monroe County. The next map just showed all 3. We contacted references for all 3 vendors. For Grand Traverse and Antrim County, for Dr. Wilcox, we provided you with the results of those references. HPL, we contacted Lenawee, Newaygo, Isabella, and Clare County, which are very similar in sizes to our jail. For ACH, Leelanau and Monroe County, and then we went outside the state and we contacted Fulton County in Kentucky and Logan County in Kentucky and gotten their responses. Page 19 is a comparison of the major elements of the in-house versus a managed healthcare program. One of the things that I found to be most impressive was the greater liability protection. Yeah. The managed healthcare program has a lot of things that, quite frankly, we just can't provide. We just don't have the staffing, we don't have the resources, the training, the expertise to provide some of the things that a managed correctional health care program is already in place. And then the last page, I just asked the board to give us some direction as to.
I told him what a...
I was looking for a recommendation.
Usually I come to you with a recommendation.
Is that a cop-out?
I think he's just chicken.
Bob, in your professional opinion, and if you had the say, which one would you select?
Is budget an option? We talked about that. If money was not an
No,
option.
if you had,
Money is.
if the decision were yours solely alone,
And money wasn't a consideration.
yeah.
I would move to HPL's program option 2, which is round-the-clock nursing. That's doing everything the way it should be done. Everything, from the medication to the on-staff medical nursing, the training, the coverage, everything.
Bob, what page should we look at? Is it 7 that would talk numbers?
Does that relieve us, or in your opinion, would that possibly, in the future, if, say, we went that way, relieve us of some liability, say, on a inmate problem we've had in the past?
Yes. You would never absolve yourself of all liability because the county, it is the county's jail.
Right.
The county's responsible for contracting with a healthcare provider to provide medical program. If it's a fly-by-night operation that is no good, the county's going to be responsible for that. If they're an excellent operation, whenever there is a problem, and there will be always problems, somebody won't like the fact that a doctor won't give him hard drugs that he used to on the street, so he's going to want to sue the doctor. But all of that, it's shifted. All that liability is shifted over to a bona fide, reputable healthcare provider.
And they're insured, and we're named as an insured, I assume, on their policy, so we're shifting the liability.
But I also like the fact that a company would be managing the nurses and the staff and all that, rather than, because corrections should be corrections, and I believe then this would alleviate that problem
Yes.
of trying to find nurses, of keeping them staffed and doing all that scheduling, which I don't think we should
That's
be
been a
doing.
real difficulty for us, filling the nursing staff.
Yeah, we can't fill the
Yeah.
positions. Sometimes they're open for months and months and months.
So what would the cost be of your recommendation over presently what we're spending per year?
It's like 102,000.
Well,
If we go
no,
with the-
no.
if we go with
If you asked him
HPL.
what he wants, I mean, the best.
Well, no, I asked him for his professional recommendation.
Yeah,
HPL 2 versus the Dr. Wilcox, 587,
yeah, compared to, on page 7, if you look at worst case,
about 208,000?
$205,000 roughly a year. Now, if you had to be concerned about budget, what would be your recommendation?
HPL 1, to start the program.
You would stick with HPL though.
And that would cost us about $102,000. You know, we really think HPL is the way to go in this. They're a little more expensive when you look at it, but when you look at the fact, well, and I don't know, did they hire a doctor up here, ACH?
my knowledge.
ACH, for example, has a couple, Leelanau and a couple here, and last we checked, they still were trying to find a doctor to run the program. They were bringing a doctor up from Monroe or wherever. So, whereas HPL, you can see, is across the state. They've got lots of coverage, they've got redundant support, excellent references, and so I think Bob and I agree that, well, I'll say for me, I really believe, even though it's $100,000 more, this is a program that's well worth the money, and HPL is the way to go, in my opinion.
I do like the fact that they would hire the current staff. I think that's a good.
In fact, they've also already been in contact with Dr. Wilcox, and Dr. Wilcox has expressed an interest in working for them as being the
So take the
local.
whole staff, perhaps.
That
Bob,
could happen.
you made the comment ACH 2 allowed the county to continue to retain their current nursing staff.
Yes.
Is that at the county's expense?
Oh,
in
yes,
addition?
we have,
See,
there are.
so if you look at ACH 2 at $384,000, you have to remember, that does not include the current costs that we're expending for nursing staff.
No, it does. I wrote
yeah,
that.
oh, it
doesn't,
On
okay.
page 5, I
But
showed
but it
that.
also, but it also shifts less of the liability away.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of
Absolutely.
I would not recommend we continue to have employees part of the program.
Right.
If we're going to switch, we should move the whole program over. And I strongly believe this is one of the most beneficial things you could do to protect the county that you have.
I think our liability for medical services in the jail is huge, and I think we've seen that historically. I have a couple things. I believe Dr. Wilcox served us well for 30 years, but that being said, I think the recent report that I got from the Department of Corrections for our annual inspection is this is the first time in a long time this jail has not received a complete accreditation and rating, and the issue that was cited was the fact that our physicals and our medicals are not being done within 14 days. That's a significant issue to me. This jail has been scored very highly for a long, long time, and we did not pass our inspection because we didn't do our medicals within 14 days, which is required by the law. And that's a concern. I think Dr. Wilcox has served us well, but I believe we've maybe outgrown that program. The idea that Dr. Wilcox has only 2 counties in the state, Antrim and Grand Traverse, and when I look at ACH, they have Leelanau and Monroe. So it's like, is there a difference between these 2 programs? They're both, pretty minimal. I like the HPL program because it's widespread, not only in Michigan, but in like 19 different states, I
Yeah,
believe.
they're
So,
throughout the
they're
country.
obviously a big operation. With those companies come a lot of economy of scale, if you will.
Well, I think HCH is a big program, too,
ACH
nationally
just is
known.
not in Michigan.
They're just
They're
not in Michigan, and that's probably why you see the cost a little bit lower initially. They're trying to get their foot in the door in more counties in Michigan. Another thing we didn't hit on that I think is important, I know Bob feels it's important, and the sheriff does, and that is the record keeping that'll go along with these medicals. It's inevitable, as Bob said, you're going to get complaints, you're going to occasionally get suits. We currently have 2 lawsuits in the jail. Medical records, complete records are just so critical to, being able to prove your position. I just think it makes so much sense, and I certainly don't see the number of claims. Well, I do see the number of claims going down as a result of a change, but I don't see the number of people looking at, us in the jail operation going down at all. That's going to continue to be more scrutinized.
The county's exposure is significantly less than what it would be.
Yeah.
Yesterday, 1 lawsuit currently in jail. We were in a motion hearing yesterday, and there were 3 attorneys representing the county due to a medical issue in the jail back in 2002.
Well, Dean and I yesterday were going over the insurance claims that are current. We're going to be talking about these in Ways and Means, but I think the 2 that we have related to the jail, well, no, I guess of those 2, we've already spent $120,000 of our deductible that comes directly out of our budgets, already. And, you know this. If there's a lawsuit that's related to the jail, we're going to spend the deductible on it. That's practical. Just no way around it.
Of the clients that HPL presently has in Michigan, is there one that's larger than Grand Traverse County? Or several? Or just glancing at it, and I might be wrong, but I thought that perhaps Grand Traverse might be the largest.
I don't believe it
We went
is.
that way.
I'm not sure. I don't know about Lenawee
Maybe you're right.
or Isabella. We may-
Isabella, I know, is smaller.
We may be the biggest.
I have the jail-rated capacities right on the preferences.
Comparison sheet.
Which are higher than ours.
It's higher than
Nuego's
ours.
212.
Lenawee's 287, Nuego's 212. We're 196.
Claire is close. Claire is
Isabella's
184.
196, Claire's
That's their
10 less,
rated
184.
capacity.
That's the
Their
rated
geo
capacity.
capacities are bigger than ours.
That's a good point, though, Commissioner. I don't know that anybody is bigger than us in terms of population and things like that.
But our jail capacity is right in the range with the size of their jails.
Part of the RFP that we asked for was litigation histories for each of these companies and how they would handle a lawsuit. And they each gave us very good breakdowns, and basically they're both the same. Each ACH and HPL has their own internal legal firms that represent their corporations. In the event of a lawsuit, they're all over it with their legal people, and both those companies have the history of suing the inmates if the inmates are wrong. They go aggressively after people that are, I don't know what they're going to collect, but
Yeah.
they aggressively go after frivolous lawsuits.
It's the reputation that they gain.
Yes.
I have a company that does the same thing, and the reductions in the lawsuits is remarkable when you have somebody that aggressively will countersue if the plaintiff's wrong.
Commissioners, before you kind of take any action on this, if you're going to take any action on this, there are a couple more areas we should talk about. First of all, I think we should talk a little bit about the timing of this, Bob. Secondly, I'd like to talk a little bit about we need to talk about funding this, how we might fund a program like this. So at least those two things I think we should talk about. Bob, could you start with the timing of this a little bit and talk
Our
about
current
that?
contract with Dr. Wilcox expires February 28th.
We extended it.
We extended it. It originally expired on December 31st, but it quickly became prevalent to us that this was a very complicated comparing apples to apples, and it was going to take us a while to do that. Dr. Wilcox agreed to continue a couple more months until we were able to get everything presented to the board and get some direction from the board. So both companies indicated, HBL indicated that about a 30-day transition would be all they would need to adequately move into their program.
All right, the second issue, the last issue will be cost, of course, but the second issue was, well, most of this, I think Bob and his staff did an excellent job of this evaluation. I mean, this is as thorough as you could ask for. The one unknown, the other unknown here that you have to be aware of is as the population changes, there will be a point where these companies will come back to you and say, wait a minute, in order to be safe, we need to add another half a nurse or 3/4 of a nurse. And those are somewhat subjective, I think, aren't they, Bob?
On both sides.
Yeah.
Us and the vendor. We asked the vendor, HPL as an example, on their Program 1, which is 7-day-a-week day shift and afternoon shift, but nothing on midnights. We asked them, at what point in our population would you come back to us and ask us to negotiate adding a midnight nurse? And they said that is already rolled into the contract. They would not do that even if we hit the 194 and stayed at 194.
They did? Okay,
did.
good.
However, we could be at 160 and have a jail full of medical problems that just overwhelm them on a regular basis, which might cause them to come back and say, we need help.
So I just wanted the commissioners to be aware, that's kind of an unknown that we would have as we got into this program, just like it's an unknown how much money we might save on medical costs.
But in the meantime, here it is, we have a company that's managing that rather than if we kept it at ourselves.
Yeah.
We'd have to be sitting there, well, we got to find another nurse somewhere, fill in.
Exactly. And I think that's a real good point. And I think, like as Commissioner Wheelock said, Dr. Wilcox has done a great job, and our staff has done a great job and worked really hard at this. I think we raise the level of accountability by making a change like this. So I just want you to be aware of that. And then the last thing, of course, when you're ready to talk about it with Dean, is the cost of this and how we might handle that. Because obviously that's $100,000 that wasn't in the budget next year. And it's an issue that we need to have some discussion about if you have an interest in doing this.
Well, my thought on the cost is if we had a lawsuit in the next year, I would think that the savings alone and the reduction of the county's liability would be well worth the $102,000.
Well, I agree with you.
And now that 102,000 is the worst-case scenario, isn't it?
We think,
Right.
yes.
The numbers
That's
you
worse.
have are the worst-case scenario.
Right, that's the worst-case scenario, so hopefully it would be less.
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think the average might be? Instead of a worst-case scenario?
Well, if you were to follow HPL's proposal, they think that based on, because they got all of our figures for the last 4 years, they analyzed all what we're spending and the types of illnesses that we typically deal with. They believe the 51,300 is a good ceiling. In fact, they also said they think they can come in less than that.
So then that would be at the 371.
371, yeah.
So we'd be saving money, right?
Well, which would be, no, it would be about
Break even.
40,
42,000.
32.
Within about 10% difference.
Yeah, $32,000 more. But, you know, it's an unknown. You know, I mean, I think the practical thing here is that we have to budget some amount additional to what we have budgeted in order to cover this. I don't think you can go in there next year and say, see if the money we have covers it. I don't think that's a wise decision. Keep in mind, and I haven't talked to Dean about the particulars of this, what comes to mind immediately to me is, you know, we probably have budgeted extra in the personnel line item.
Yeah.
That might be able to cover a part of this, but I guess I'd like to defer and get Dean's thoughts on that issue.
Well, that would be correct. I mean, we have nurses budgeted and the staff at this point because they're part of the,
What I'm saying is that's in this number.
well, I don't, would it necessarily be in,
It's compared to the number.
Bob took that into consideration?
Yep, it's in there,
Okay.
Dean. So
Well,
no, we
yeah.
have to come up with new money someplace.
Well, at a minimum, you'd want to make the $32,000 or $35,000 adjustment to cover, you know, the contract amount, the minimum. And that is something that we would, you know, want to identify very early on in 2010. I'm not going to sit here and tell you now I know where those funds are. I don't.
Bob, one of the concerns that I have is in regard to the mental health situation. You know, you and I have both talked on numerous occasions about the current mental health capabilities in our jail is deficient. And, you know, we've had multiple meetings with CMH and those kind of things. Are these people going to help us with some of that, do you think?
They have psychiatric and psychological services, that's part of their organization.
Right.
But they would be looking for a local psychiatrist, and we already have one in place.
Right.
I would recommend that for the $20,000 a year, we still keep our local psychiatrist in place, and that psychiatrist would just be working
And
with their...
that money is currently in our budget, but it is not in Dr. Wilcox's portion, so it's not reflected here. That
That's correct.
$20,000 is still in the 2010
The
budget.
separate line item all by itself.
The one con that I seen in, I believe it was Isabella County, was that they had some issues with their CMH in the fact that their CMH wanted to use the latest and greatest psychotropic medications and that they were very expensive.
Yes.
You know, I don't know that we've had that problem, but I do know that we do have a mental health issue within our jail.
Well, and let me just say this. One of the things Bob and I talked about, we do have the ability to hire them for additional money to do the mental health work.
Mm-hmm.
2 hours
a week.
Yeah.
5,000.
We do, how much, 35? So it's more expensive, and I think Bob and I agree, we should stick with what we have and give that a try, and if that doesn't work out, then, you know, we do have another option of kind of removing that.
Well, but that being said, the psychiatrist is additional money, but what I was concerned about was whether or not there was psychologists and those people built into their program, and I think I'm reading that there is in their current program, and what I'm wondering is maybe if that's going to serve us better than the current program we have with CMH.
I don't think it really is built in there, is it, Bob?
What they have is a psychiatric program that they have additional training for their nursing staff and the doctor to recognize and deal with psychological needs of the inmates. However, they would have to refer to the serious ones to a psychiatrist, and whether they have their psychiatrist that they would hire locally, or they use our psychiatrist that we've hired locally they're able to do either way.
Exactly, but the point is that one of the real significant problems that I think, at least in my mind, we've identified is the fact that we don't have anyone in-house capable of adequately assessing these people when they come into the jail, that they truly have a psychiatric need and what that need is. These people are trained to do that, correct?
The nurses are not trained to the level that we have right now with CMH. They're not trained to do that, so no, I'd have to say no, that's not part of these programs.
Okay.
We
But
would
our
still
nurses aren't either.
No.
We don't have that.
Oh, our
capability
nurses have
presently,
none,
Nor
no.
we with this program. We would still rely on CMH and the needs of the contract with the psychiatrist.
I know when I asked Bob, what do you think it would be like if you were able to focus your staff in on, care for the inmates and not have to worry about medical issues? That dealing with medical issues with the inmates, how would that be? And there was this look of relief that kind of came over his face, because it is the one area that we're really kind of out of school. It's not what they do, and it's a difficult thing, and I just think this really makes good sense.
Well, and it's such a moving target, depending on what our daily population is, that both by numbers and medical need.
Medical need, especially.
We went through a few years ago, we extradited someone from Florida that came back that had huge medical needs that cost us literally hundreds of thousands of dollars while he was incarcerated. And we should have left him in Florida. What's your pleasures?
I would move that we authorize the sheriff's office to award the inmate medical services bid and contract for a period of 3 years beginning March 1st, 2010 and ending February 28th, 2013 to HPL, the number 1 program.
Number 1 program?
Support. We have a motion made and seconded. Further discussion?
I would just have Dean work on coming up with a number.
Right.
Well, we're pretty confident we can come up with that, and we'll have that, well in advance of the time the contract would start.
I just have to say, I think this is a great idea. I think it's something much needed, and as we say, it takes corrections and gives them back corrections and lets somebody manage the prison population, which I think is a great idea.
Well, I think the potential for the cost savings and the liability issues in years to come will far surpass what the difference is it's costing us.
Well, and as we evaluate dollar amounts, if you notice that the listing of account balances that we seen earlier in the morning with, when we talked about purchasing vehicles, there's $20,000 identified in the 2009 budget for medications and pharmaceuticals and outside medical services that we haven't expended this year already. So, we hopefully will be able to identify the funding for this.
Bob, because of the complexity of this, I'm going to encourage the other county commissioners to watch this meeting, but I'd also like you to they all have a copy of it. They all have copies, but I'd like you, if you wouldn't mind, to make a call, just a courtesy call to those other commissioners and say, if you have any questions or you want to have a sit-down to talk about this, maybe we could arrange to do that, because, this is going to be very complicated, and when it comes up at the end of the month, I'm hoping we don't have issues that hold it up. So let's try to be proactive about that and answer their questions ahead of time.
Dennis, do you believe that there's a chance, or Dean, that by our Ways and Means meeting in this month, you'll be able to identify the additional funding? I know it's asking a lot.
Well, I always say yes, and Dean always says,
Well, that's why I asked you, but then I decided to ask Dean
You
instead.
know what my answer's going to be, yeah, we'll find it.
I'll get to work on it then.
Okay, well, it's just, before the board.
Or by the board, anyway.
Approves this
Yeah.
contract, I'd like to have, a reasonable handle on the additional funding.
Okay,
Just to smooth the waters, so as we move forward, it's easier with the full board.
absolutely.
I do believe this is truly a huge benefit to the county. I absolutely
And a
do.
good-
And
again,
the
good
safety of
job.
our jail.
Good job to your staff.
And the safety of our jail.
And you.
Okay, we have a motion made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate your work. That brings us to Metro Fire.
And this is actually, you got to go back in the packet a little bit to
Right.
get to this report.
Good morning, Pat Parker, Metro Fire Chief, and I have with me Meredith Hawes, our Fire and Life Safety Educator. As per our contract that we signed early this year, by December of every year, we're supposed to give you a report of our plan for next year, and by March of the following year, a follow-up report on the previous year. That's what we're doing today. I asked Chris and Dennis if they'd like a full-blown presentation with charts and PowerPoints, and the answer was no. And so what you have in front of you today is a 3 or 4 page report that Meredith prepared, kind of giving you a synopsis of what we've done so far this year. I think you can see from the report that we've made great strides in fire and life safety education. Meredith didn't start until about February. Took her about a month to 4 to 6 weeks to get off the ground, but we hit the ground running. We have great numbers, and really the success of this program has a lot to do with the monies that you all have given us. You can see great collaboration that's going on with multifaceted organizations. You can see that we have hit target audiences that we have been very, very concerned with, and that being the older adults, the disabled population, and of course the youth is still our number one area that we think we can make our biggest long-term gains on. So that is about all that I'm going to speak of about, unless you would like to talk about particulars, and that's why Meredith is here to do that. The evaluation part of it is tough to get our arms around, but we think after this first year is almost completed, we're starting our second year of a 3-year contract with the county, that all we can see is great things out of this program.
Meredith, did you want to add something first?
I guess I would just highlight that we have continued to do some of the traditional fire and burn education, and we've reached a high number of young people in that area, close to 5,500 young people. But at the same time, we've been able to also initiate some new programs, the Risk Watch program that's getting underway, and that involves other community partners. It gives us a platform, the unintentional injury prevention platform, for not only the fire service to be able to speak to fire and burn, but also incorporate other community partners to talk about several other different category headings which are listed on there. And then also initiate programs for seniors, some outreach to the disabled community. And we've also been able to begin to put together a volunteer program. And so I guess what I would just want to highlight is that we have moved away from some of the very traditional fire service education where you have one public educator going out and individually talking to groups of kids, and we've begun to investigate programs that incorporate other community partners and community groups, community volunteers, so that we can expand our scope and our reach to just get out there to a whole bigger group of people.
I might also add that we have been successful this year in getting a couple of grants to help supplement this program, and we've received monies from the Schmuckel Foundation, Quota International, and we've also applied for funds from FEMA as well for this program.
You know, I know a lot of discussion was held earlier this year through our budget time about whether or not there was a duplication of services with the MSU extension. You know, I'm very pleased to see this Grand Traverse Risk Watch coalition, whereas we're identifying all of these stakeholders, if you will, in the education of these people. I like the idea of the NFPA certification of programs. You know, coming from a fire service background, you know, I think that's important to us. We have identified and made presentations to, if I add them up right, about 7,600 individuals in 3 very high-risk groups: youth, seniors, and disabled people, which, you know, I think it speaks very well for our program, considering we have a program that's basically about 9 months active. You know, we've come a long ways in a short period of time, and you know, I think I give Pat and Meredith a great deal of credit for that, along with their boards and employees. You know, I'm very impressed with where we've come in 9 months. You know, I think we floundered just a little early, you know, between the time Jimmy Carroll left and this program got up and running, and that made all of us feel a little uncomfortable, I'm sure, but the program that's evolved out of that, I believe, is a vast improvement, and I'm not taking anything away from Jimmy's program. I participated in that program for a long time, but that being said, I believe that we have truly identified high-risk groups and made a very solid effort to educate those people, not only in how not to burn, but how not to fall and get injured. We all realize in the fire service business anymore that, 85% of our business is medical. We don't burn houses. That's not how our people get hurt. So, that's,
One of the goals that Dennis had when we started this was to also include the other fire departments in the county, and we have had great success working with Traverse City, Blair, and Peninsula. Of course, Metro and Rural work very close for 30 years, but these other fire departments are involved and great partners as well.
well, in adding in, the Munson people, the prescription shop people, along with North Light, is a huge asset to the program. Any questions for these folks?
Looks good.
And I'm sure that all other commissioners got a copy of this report also, because
Yeah,
they
they
got a copy of the packet. So, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And if there's no other questions, we'll...
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
We'll look forward to seeing you in March.
This brings us to the second opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to make comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Unfinished business, do we have any, Dennis?
I just want to point out that at the board meeting last week, we asked you to withdraw the DK security policy and procedures provisions. The sheriff wanted some time to look at it, and I think I told you at that time, and it's in the minutes, that it was referred to public safety. Actually, that'll go back to LNA. That's where they were the ones who reviewed it initially, and so it'll go back to LNA, and I just wanted to clarify that with this committee. And I believe the sheriff is working with Katie in our office to kind of find out what his concerns are, so we're hoping to have that move forward. That's it.
None others?
All right.
Is there any other business? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion all gone.